Hi, HR Nation. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives from the world's leading global brands. On today's show, I'm joined by a special guest. We're joined by Darren Murph, who's the head of remote at GitLab. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you, Chris. I'm doing well. It's a pleasure to be here.
You definitely win the best camera guest of all guests so far.
I appreciate that. Right, I appreciate that, Chris. Yeah, I did my due diligence through writing at Engadget eons ago, which then you probably learned from. So yeah, it's funny how worlds collide.
Exactly. You're like, yeah, I've got a capture card that's normally made for gaming and I've got a mirrorless camera. If you said that to an average person, they'd be like, what did you just say?
Yeah, correct. No, it's so complicated. I documented it. I mean, it's the GitLab ethos, document everything. So in my README about how to work with me, essentially the operating manual for me, I actually have a section on my work from our office setup. Yeah. So when I get that question, the goal is to answer everything with a link. And so instead of telling people 50 different components to buy, I just send them a link and say, here, this is how you replicate it.
Yeah. And we'll get into that because as you mentioned, that's part of your ethos and what you do. And I absolutely love that as well. Super, super interesting. I did the same thing. I realized that after the 100th message of Chris, what mic do you use? Watch camera. I was like, I'm just going to create a web link and send it to people because it's going to take way too long for me to get through to everyone.
It's one of the superpowers of great remote teams, scaling knowledge. And the boring solution there is write things down in a shareable form. It's amazing how the simple things can enable lots of capabilities in business and life.
Yeah, I love your background, by the way. So keen musician, I'm guessing. Pretty easy guess. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Funny enough, I've documented the guitar collection as well. So I can give you a link to that. Yeah, the keen-eyed will recognize that the bass is a left-handed guitar and the guitar is a right-handed guitar.
I didn't notice it, but now I can see it.
I'm the southpaw. I'm the lefty. My wife is right-handed. So the unfortunate thing is we have to buy two of everything. We can't play each other's instruments. The upside is we adopted a newborn at birth about 2.5 years ago. So whichever hand he ends up preferring, his instruments are already pre-purchased. So I just like to say that we're really great long-term planners.
Before we go any further, tell everyone a little bit more about yourself personally and your journey to where we are now at GitLab.
Yeah, so I've worked across the spectrum of remote for my entire career. A lot of people ask me, why are you such a big advocate for remote and flexible working? So it started because I was obsessed with travel and I wanted to travel the world very early. I wanted to knock off my bucket list before most people even think to create theirs. And I saw early on that remote work was life's greatest cheat code. I could travel around the United States where I'm from, travel to over 50 countries in 5 years while earning a Guinness World Record, and actually wrote a book on the heels of that called Living the Remote Dream. So you have to remember at that time, this was an incredibly foreign concept that you could actually do great work in a career that mattered to you while also exploring the world. And so this was the perfect intersection of what made me. So fast forward to more recent times, remote work has become even more personal because, as I mentioned, my wife and I adopted a newborn at birth. It's an extraordinary way to grow your family. It's an open adoption. It is unbelievable. But adoption and fostering can be a complicated journey, and it is made a lot more complicated if your work defines when you are available. So if you're living life around the fringes of a rigid commute with an 8 to 5 in between, to be honest, there's not much life left to live. And so when I look at what's happening through COVID, one of the silver linings is millions of people have experienced this awakening that they can live their life differently if they recapture the commute and repurpose it for something else. And so instead of having to listen to me push the remote work boulder uphill for 15 years, now everyone in a knowledge working capacity kind of gets it. And I think this is the moment to take advantage of the global permission slip to do things differently. So that's what drives me. That's what I'm passionate about. In terms of what do, I love marketing, editorial, and comms. Anything in that spectrum is fascinating to me. Love telling stories. And a lot of that is what I do now at GitLab. GitLab is an all-remote company. We have 1,300 people in more than 65 countries, with no company-owned physical offices anywhere in the world. So we were intentionally designed for maximum geographic diversity. We make an amazing collaboration platform and DevOps platform. It's used by organizations around the world, but our organizational design is fascinating. We've had researchers around the world actually write articles in the Journal of Organizational Design. We have case studies through INSEAD and Harvard Business School teaching people how to run an organization without an office. And it's been a fascinating 2 years. I joined about 6 months before COVID, but obviously my work has become much more relevant to the world since the pandemic.
Amazing. What an intro. Don't know where to start. And on that last point, that's how I came across GitLab, is when I would speak to HR executives and be like, do you know of a good example or a good case study? And GitLab all the time. I'm not just saying that to flatter you.
I appreciate. And
I was like, who is this company that I keep hearing about? And it makes sense that they have a head of remote in yourself, in your organization.
I think we pioneered the head of remote role. But now, since COVID, we actually are tracking this, as you would imagine. There is a page devoted to this. Companies like Dropbox, Facebook, and many other large companies and small companies are putting in dedicated leaders around the remote function. And many of them are figuring out that this is a sea change in how they work, especially if they're going from a co-located culture to a remote culture. The transition is actually harder than starting and building the infrastructure from scratch. A lot of chief people officers tried to add remote transition to their job description, and about 3 months in figured out, oh, this is a bit much.
Maybe it's a bit more than I can handle. Yeah.
It's a bit much.
Yeah. Well, for people that don't know, what does a typical day or look like for you? And, and obviously it would vary for companies and stuff like that, but I'd love to hear from your perspective. What people are like, what does a head of remote do in a company?
Yeah, it depends on the company. So I'll give you the example for us, but depending on the company, you might need some different things. So for me, it's a very dynamic day. It's a very cross-functional role. You have to remember that legal, comms, marketing, all of these disparate functions, they speak different languages to do their day-to-day jobs. But the one common thread in an all-remote company is that everyone is remote. So we all need the right tools to collaborate together. We all need the right L&D curriculum and manager training to make sure that our leaders know how to manage remotely and how to use the tools, sometimes common tools in uncommon ways. A lot of people bring in institutional baggage from the way things were done.
That must be an interesting one.
Look, there's so much of the onboarding process that dives into the way you probably did things and then explains this is how we do it at GitLab, and in fact, how it is better and more inclusive. And it is a mind bender for most people. We have one of the most comprehensive onboarding processes I've ever seen, because you do have to unlearn a lot of things. And
it's more difficult in my experience.
It becomes easier when the entire organization is rowing in that direction. And I will say, I am blessed to work in an organization that set that out, and people self-select and opt into this way of working, mostly because they are leaving something else and they want to find a different, more inclusive way of working. And I remember when I joined GitLab, it felt like such a utopian, forward-looking place. It was almost like I was joining the future. But I do hope that the pandemic is bringing everyone else up to that. I like to say that we're on the razor's edge of the razor's edge for organizational design, but now it is suddenly relevant to many others. And so kind of back to the question of what do? I document a lot of what I do, and I listen to a lot of our people on what they're learning and their bias towards asynchronous or their tweaking of meeting hygienes and things of that nature. And then I write it down. GitLab has a phenomenal public handbook. All of it's open source. It's over 10,000 pages, and over 100,000 words of it are just how we do remote. And I'm responsible for writing all of that and keeping it fresh and keeping it current. And we have distilled our best knowledge into the remote playbook. And countless organizations have downloaded this and have used it as their blueprint for transitioning to remote. Because a lot of leaders are thinking, has anyone done this? This feels like something completely brand new. And so GitLab was able to raise their hand and say, well, actually, we've been doing this for a really long time, and we would love to not only show you what we've learned and how to do it, but we want you to contribute your learnings back as well and help us make this community stronger.
Amazing. And if you're listening, if you click the link below, I'll put the link to the handbook for everyone, because I know there's people where can I grab this link? We'll find it and put it there. So if you're listening, it's already there below. I think a big challenge, which we're only going to see, you've obviously gone through this, but many companies are going to see it, is how do we make this sustainable in organizations and create these practices in the teams and organization? Any tips you could provide on that, having gone through it and lived and breathed it as an organization?
Sustainability requires absolute executive sponsorship. And it's impossible to talk about this without veering into the topic of hybrid. And so many organizations right now view hybrid remote as the best of both worlds. But without intentionality, it can quickly become the worst of both worlds. And what I mean by that is if you maintain an office first workflow and culture and then just bolt remote onto it by saying, we'll allow you to work remotely now. We won't terminate you if you decide to not come to the office. You can work remotely. That's a huge difference between being intentional about converting your culture and workflows to remote first, so that if someone does happen to come back to a piece of physical real estate, they simply go there to work remotely. They simply go there because maybe the food or the coffee is better. So absolute executive sponsorship is number one. The second part is the executives have to stay out of the office if you want to make this sustainable. And the reason for this is very simple. Signals are more powerful than policy. And so if the day that an office reopens, the entire executive team flocks back to it, it sends a clear signal to everyone in the organization that although you may be allowed to work remotely, you better show up if you care about progressing in your career, and it will erase all of the muscle that you've built on the remote first side of things. A lot of executives don't really appreciate this, or they enjoy working at the office so much that they just think, well, it's where I prefer to go. And although that may be true, you have to take one for the team, stay out of it, because it's the only way to avoid the A team and the B team and all of the politics in between. So you have to start there. And those are not easy pills to swallow for some leaders.
And they're the biggest culprits, it seems, because you are right, because during my recent workshops and events, all of the executives that could tune into the show or come in, they're all in the office. And these are the same people that are saying, hybrid, remote. And I'm like, every time I see you, you're in the office as well. And I have thought so many times, I'm like, what signal is that sending to the rest of your employees whenever they see you're in an office environment? And then I get it. Yes, I prefer to be like in this office. My team, we have a model where they come in once a week on a Tuesday. It's working really well, but we've now had to document everything, create processes, and have everything in place because we can't, to make sure that knowledge exchange happens, not just when we're here as well. But you are right. We're going to have to, and you got to think those executives are probably the ones that have been working for the longest in an office environment who are going to be the hardest to change.
Correct. Well. But you ask, look, this genie will never get put back in the bottle. You have an entire workforce now that will show up to job interviews and they'll ask, what is your stance on workplace flexibility? And every HR leader has to have a clear answer to that. The shift is going to require work, but it will be worth it because it's a long-term investment in making sure that your business is more resilient. You are enabling people to work in more places. You're enabling results to be driven in more places so that when the next crisis hits, you're ready for it. Mm-hmm. And one of the toughest parts of this is converting tacit knowledge to explicit knowledge. And this is especially important for culture. So much of culture for a co-located company is the vibe that you get in walking around the building, these unwritten rules of how work happens and how people engage and interact. The only way to make that practical in a remote setting or a flexible setting or a hybrid setting is to literally document it. So if you look at the GitLab values page, we don't stop with just our 6 core values. We have sub-values underneath of them, substantiating values. And they are literally how you treat each other. So you just skip past the whole tacit thing and just get explicit. We have one element of collaboration called short toes, where we give people permission to contribute to anyone else's domain without fear of stepping on their toes, because at GitLab, we expect you to collaborate with short toes. This is an example of converting tacit to explicit. And it's not as hard as it may seem. I know for some leaders they're thinking, this is daunting. How are we ever going to find time to sit down and write it down? Schedule an e-group offsite or an executive team offsite. Start with a blank page, paste in your values, and then start writing down, how do people treat each other? What's really funny about this is I don't actually think that's remote exclusive. I think even if a company is going fully back to an office, that would build more cohesion and more discipline around your team.
I think, but they should be more worried about what if we don't do it, the impact it's going to have versus, the scary or task of sitting down and doing it, because then people are just left in limbo and you kind of have nothing to base.
And we laugh about it, but it's a serious question. The friction that you're feeling globally is the greatest transfer of workplace power that most of us have ever seen in our lifetimes. The pandemic has greatly democratized the conversation around remote, and it is most definitely shifting the power more towards the people and less towards the institution. And if you don't write these things down, competitors will. And it's going to be easy for job seekers to see who is being transparent about what it is actually like to work in a given place. And now they have more options than ever. Before the pandemic, if you valued geographic flexibility over things like ego and salary and title and prestige, with very few options. And so you might take a substandard hybrid experience because you wanted to live in a certain place. Maybe you had elder care or childcare responsibilities that were more important. But now that has dramatically changed and will continue to dramatically change as the startup class of 2020, 2021 and beyond are inventing companies with no offices from day one, and they will be tailor-made for that type of flexibility. Mm-hmm. And so legacy organizations need to be ready for that. They are competing with an entirely different class of employer.
And you're right, we're already seeing it. There's the growing ranks of knowledge workers who are just refusing to relinquish their newfound flexibility.
Well, you've got people that spent the better part of 18 months proving that they could do their job, and in many cases raise productivity while also juggling the stressors of a pandemic. And somehow in the middle of that, they recognized that recaptured commute time would give them more access to family, better health, more rest, more engagement with their community. It became habit. After you've lived that for 18 months, it becomes habit. And so for an employer to ask for it back, it makes sense why someone would put up a fight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Even in my small company, we've kind of restructured the company and even some of our products based around the team, because we realized the team doesn't want to be on a plane traveling every few weeks to a physical event. I don't want to be away from my daughter. We're like, maybe we should do more virtual now. And like, so it's actually completely shaped, not just the way we work, but our actual business, our operating model and the products that we produce has changed to meet the needs of me personally and the employees.
Yeah.
As well.
And I'll tell you, the progressive HR leaders are going to look at this and not see it through the lens of scarcity and constriction. They're going to see it as this incredible opportunity. So now if you don't need an office to do the things that an office needed to do, it has a new lease on life, pardon the pun. What do we do with that? Now the leader has a blank slate to reinvent what happens there. When you think about culture, how do we build culture at our company? Well, we had to build it around everyone being in this building. So we were constricted to what could happen in this building. You don't have that anymore. Now you can invest in bringing your whole team together once a year, or give your senior leaders budget so that every quarter or every half year, they develop their own onsite, and maybe they poll the team and they pick a new place in the world and they receive cultural exploration that they would never have before. There's so much opportunity when you remove the burden of everyone has to commute to this same physical space every single day. And the best HR leaders will take advantage of that and use it to kind of rip up the playbook from the past and create a new one. And from a talent acquisition standpoint, this is the new unlimited food at the cafeteria. This is the new foosball table. This is like, insert whatever you want that attracted the last generation of workers.
10 times more meaningful.
10 times more meaningful.
And impactful on their personal and in every aspect, to be honest, from every point of view.
Indeed.
When you so many companies are going through this shift right now, and you've seen other case studies. Obviously, you've lived it in your own organization. If you could put 3 things out there, what would you'd say like the top 3 mistakes do you typically see companies make and transition in?
Yeah, the number one mistake is trying to go hybrid and assuming that the A team and B team thing will just solve itself. The second one is not investing in onboarding and learning and development. When you are onboarding someone into a virtual environment, it is critical that enough is documented that they feel plugged into the team. And then you also consider giving them an in-person touch point, whether that's a quarterly cohort. Everyone that joins within a quarter gets this on-site type of arrangement. That's super important. And on the learning and development side, not every manager who is great as a co-located manager will be great as a remote manager. It requires fundamentally different skills. It's an entirely different mentality. So if organizations don't invest in upskilling their own leaders, you shouldn't expect their management to transfer over immediately. And the third one is just assuming that, we'll all snap back to the way it used to be. If you take that approach, you're going to see massive talent drain. The top talent in your organization will want to have a high impact career and flexibility. And COVID has proven that in many cases for knowledge workers, that actually is attainable.
Mm-hmm. And we're already seeing it. I think we just at the beginning, but I'm already seeing, even again, I've said this so many times on the podcast, sorry for people listen all the time, but like close friends and family members of mine that are super successful and highly technically skilled are either leaving or they can reconsider in their roles because of pretty much everything you just said. And these are people that before the pandemic, you thought they're never going to leave. They love their job. They've had 15 months to think about it and to work a different way and experience life in a whole new way. And, if those companies don't adapt, they're going to lose them.
Yeah, it's going to be an amazing couple of years to see which organizations invest in their future, not even really remote. I actually think the term remote is going to
get out of the picture. Yeah.
And we'll just call it work. It's going to be unnecessary to call something remote work. And we've already been doing this for decades. Most of the people listening to this have probably edited a presentation on an airplane. You were working remotely. You didn't know it. You didn't call it that.
Yeah.
But this has been happening for a long time. And COVID simply accelerated the trend by opening everyone's collective eyes at the exact same time. Mm-hmm. And so instead of GitLab being this advocate for remote over here in the corner and everyone else may be paying attention to it on occasion, now everyone's eyes are open to the possibilities to it. It's a phenomenal opportunity for the workplace to become more inclusive. The people that were most ostracized, your caregivers, your working parents, those with mobility challenges, military spouses that have to relocate but can't really port their career. These people needed that flexibility the most. Now they are able to get it. And my hope is that with fewer people on the tube and on the road, even those that have on-site jobs, those that work in automotive garages, for example, hopefully their quality of life improves too, because they're fighting with fewer people for the same resources. I think it will fundamentally change how municipal planning is done. Right now, you have major cities that will lobby a corporate to come in and then build a skyscraper in the middle of downtown in order to bolster the economic tax base. But you could take a different approach, which is invest in green spaces and great medical centers, and then invite knowledge workers to come live there because you're competing to be the most livable city. And then even as people's careers evolve and they change jobs, ideally they don't change locations. So now you have a much more sustainable long-term economic bolstering instead of just building the skyscraper and when the people leave to go somewhere else, so do their dollars or pounds. It's going to change so
world,
much.
literally the world. Like
The world.
about remote, because I say it all the time. Shane and I go for a bike ride around London and some of the kind of financial, like Canary Wharf, which is what kind of the financial hub, and it's just so strange to see it completely empty, and you realize the only reason people were here was just to sit at a desk.
Yeah.
Like, and it's just really weird.
It's weird, and it could even be dystopian right now. But here's the thing, it won't always be that way. Humans are incredibly inventive. And I already know of several real estate projects that were offices that are being actively converted into living spaces. And so now you have cities that once had a housing crisis. Now that is going to be eased by converting unused office spaces to living spaces. And they're filling up their reservation list, because for many, living in a city becomes more attractive when you can take advantage of the things that are there without all of the people unnecessarily running back and forth to an office when they could just do it from home. So even some of the fear mongering right now of what happens with this, and look at this, there's no one here. Well, give us some time. Humans are very inventive. We're very adaptable.
Especially when there's a housing shortage.
Correct.
There's a massive housing shortage everywhere around the world right now. So that makes complete. I didn't know about that. That makes so much sense. And there's so many incredible places and locations that they can do that with as well. I don't want to move away from the city. I like being close to friends, family, and also the resources that you benefits you get from living in the city. But I do not miss getting on the London Underground train and being stuck to someone and spending hours getting to and from work. So I kind of a win-win if I can get both. Yeah, and I enjoy getting on the train now. I got on the train with my daughter recently, and there's no one around. This is great. It's a nice experience.
It becomes novel again, right? Like you're more likely to use the public transit to go visit small businesses because the mere thought of the tube doesn't
scare me away. I would rather cycle and spend 30 minutes more cycling than get on a train. I'm sure most people in London or any city will probably feel the same way as well. Before I let you go, I know you've got your event coming up soon. I want to talk a bit about that because I know for our audience, they'll be super interested in it. Tell me a bit more. When is it and what can people expect?
June 29th, 2021, Remote by GitLab. It's going to be the premier event exploring the intersection between flexible work culture and inclusion. It's the first time we're doing it. And the guest list, the speaker list, is absolutely extraordinary. So remotebygitlab.com. It's free to register. What we want to do is build a community. We know so many people are living through this transition. And there's no better way to get through it than to see what other people are doing and communicate with other people and learn from each other. GitLab has written a playbook, but there's a lot to learn. And so we're inviting people to sign up for that. We're going to have workshops as well where you can connect. It's going to be absolutely incredible. And I like to think that we are living in times where history is being written, and this is going to be a pivotal moment in where we go from here as a workplace community.
Amazing. I think now more than ever, we need to come together and learn from each other and share. we're all in this, and the link's below to register. So click link wherever if you're on LinkedIn right now or you're listening to the podcast, there'll be a link to register for free below. Make sure you do so. You have nothing to lose. And also share it with other friends and colleagues that you feel will gain value as well. But before I let you go, Darren, if there's kind of one parting piece of advice, what would that be? And then where can people connect with you personally? Because you produce so much great content yourself online. So where can people
thank you for that. You can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn at Darren Murph. Would love to connect. One parting piece of advice. So for leaders, don't be afraid of the flexibility. I know this seems a bit paradoxical, but the more you give people freedom to live their best lives, they actually pour that culture back into the workplace. And don't underestimate the power of geographic diversity. When you invite cultures from all over the world, it inevitably pours into your product as well as your people. And it fundamentally builds a more empathetic workplace. For you personally, throw everything you used to know about how you had to live life out of the window. Listen, I can put every weekend of your life in tally marks on the back and front of one sheet of paper. That ain't many. Time is precious. Life is short. This is our opportunity to make the most of it and do things differently while also contributing to a high impact career. So I want to share that inspiration. I mean, we've grown our family by one, largely because of the flexibility around this. So consider what your life could look like. This is the opportunity. We might not get a chance like this again. These don't come around often.
Yeah. Well, look, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. Obviously, if anyone listening, they can hear the passion. I think you're in the right place, Darren, for what you do, and love everything. And obviously, congrats again with a new addition to the family. And I look forward to doing this again soon.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for the platform. Thanks all for the listening ears. Be well.